morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're located. I want to welcome all of you to the Connect First Google Hangout, the future of the contact center. My name is Chris Herrick, and I'm the Vice President of PACE. And I wanted to let all of you know initially that this webinar is being recorded, and everyone that's registered will receive the recording by the end of the week via email. Also, during the Google Hangout, if you do have any questions for any of our panelists, please go ahead and email them to marketing@connectfirst.com. Again, that's marketing@connectfirst.com. And we'll try to get to as many of your questions at the end of our Google Hangout as possible. We're going to break our Google Hangout into 3 separate categories today, talking about the cloud and a consultative approach as well as compliance. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our esteemed panelists that we have for you today. The first panelist that we have is Jeff Mena, and Jeff leads the company's strategic direction and is also the primary architect of the Connect First platform. He has taken the product through 4 generations in a desire to develop the most feature-rich, highly scalable, fault-tolerant, and secure cloud-based contact center solution on the market. The next panelist that we have is Reed Hauser. And Reed is the Director of Compliance and Telemarketing with Sitel Corporation, which is located in Omaha, Nebraska. Reed has actually worked in the teleservices industry for 11 years and has more than 25 years of regulatory compliance experience. Mr. Hauser leads Sitel's global telemarketing, do not call, and privacy compliance efforts. He is responsible for ensuring that compliance with all federal, state, and provincial rules that impact Sitel and its clients globally. Reed is also the chair of the PACE's monthly Compliance Officers Forum. And finally, certainly last but not least, we have Krista Heibel. And Krista has worked in the contact center industry since 1992, serving nearly every position from telemarketer to CEO. She's also developed a career known for her back to the basics, leadership and operational management, process development, and training. Krista has grown and guided numerous call center operations to success, oftentimes coming in to fix struggling operations and leading them back to profitability or driving successful growth strategy initiatives for investment operations. Again, those are our panel of esteemed speakers that we have today. So we're going to go ahead and get this started. So I'm going to throw this question out, and Jeff, I think this is more of a question for you and or Krista at this point. So although many of the technologies are not vastly different in the contact center industry than they were 5 or even 10 years ago, it seems as though some contact centers are hesitant of some of the newer features and technologies. What technologies do you think will be necessary for contact centers to be successful in 2015? And then as a follow-up to that, what is your advice for implementing these technologies that are innovative to a contact center?
So I would say that I don't necessarily agree that people are afraid to adopt new technologies. I think that people are hesitant to see about the stability and reliability of these technologies, which I think is a little bit different than the actual functionality. You know, Krista is on the ground floor of this conversation. You know, what are your thoughts, Krista? I'm not seeing a whole lot of hesitation to adopt new technology. I think people are just concerned about stability and uptime and reliability of new technologies.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think it is a concern unless it's coming down to resources and cost. I think most of us know with multi-channel where we need to be and the technologies we have to have in place to service our clients and best customer experience today. But I think where a lot of organizations are struggling is on limited budgets. What are the priorities? With a very a large number of cloud-based solutions and offerings out there, which are the best. They don't oftentimes, I don't think, have the resources in-house to go through a really formal evaluation process, and so they've maybe selected technologies without going about it the right way and have struggled with adaptation in-house, and have felt like that has been a waste of time and money. So I don't think it's a hesitancy because of the fact that it's changed. I think it comes down to resources and budget. And to your point, Christine, about what do they need to be looking at, I mean, I think all organizations today have to be looking at how are they supporting multi-channel, not just voice and email, but chat and social media response and mobile integration are all things that I think every organization today has to be talking about what their strategy around is. And still performance management, as much as it pains me to say that, because this has been a data-driven industry since I started in it, I still think there's a lack of reporting and KPI management that's easy for organizations across the multiple technologies that they're running their organizations on today, and I think they're struggling with that as well.
That's great feedback. So this going to both of you again, and Reed, we will definitely get to you, no doubt about that. But where does cloud technology stand today in market integration and adaptation? Jeff, what do you think about that?
I think from an integration standpoint, the cloud vendors are being much more successful than the on-premises vendors have ever been. It's kind of core to the philosophy of a SaaS-based system to be able to integrate and interoperate with other systems. So a lot of the engineers that are working on these cloud-based systems, they're different engineers than would maybe write an older telecom infrastructure built for on-premise. You know, a lot of the design philosophies are around integration. So I think the cloud vendors in general are doing a much better job than the premise guys ever did.
Krista, do you have any feedback that you want to add to that question?
Sorry. Unmuting issues there. Yeah, you know, the forecast for cloud integration is obviously aggressive. I am a pro-cloud lady. As an operations person, I understand the flexibility and the integration capability that Jeff alluded to that cloud gives us. I think what is overwhelming for the consumer and my client today is navigating the large list of products on the market. And some of them are feature rich and ready to go and are going to make a contact center happy. And others are maybe not quite where they need to be at or where they're represented as at. And so again, after investing time and resources into that process and not coming out with something you feel like is better than where you started is frustrating. And I see that with a lot of IT and executive teams. So I'm still surprised there seems to still be a little hesitancy, particularly in the small and mid-tier level BPO organization to make that conversion to cloud, but I think it is inevitable, and I think it will get easier as the market kind of weeds out some of the top-tier players from some of those that are in the market today but are not really where they need to be at.
So Krista, and I'll let you take this first since you just mentioned it. So you said there's people or smaller BPOs that really aren't embracing the cloud infrastructure. So what, if anything, could you list out that truly benefits not only large organizations but smaller organizations as well from using the cloud?
Well, I think we go back to time and resource and budget for a lot of the small and mid-level players. So I'm looking at maybe the under $75 million a year operations, and when I look at that bucket, you know, oftentimes they don't have the resources in-house to do the necessary education and research to find the right product and to educate themselves around what cloud means to them. So there are false assumptions potentially being made, or they've talked to other peers that have tried to do a changeover or navigate through that and have struggled themselves. So I think a lot of what hinders organizations from making that step is a lot of internal challenges, more than, you know, the marketplace itself.
Excellent. Jeff, do you want to expand on that, knowing that you're kind of the feet on the street with this issue?
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's one of the challenges right now is there's so many vendors in the cloud contact center space that I think a lot of people, a lot of organizations are having trouble, as Krista was saying, kind of filtering out who are the real players and who's just got a good marketing message. And unfortunately, those guys that maybe have a bunch of money to spend on marketing and don't have a product to back it up are actually causing some hesitation in the overall migration from premise to cloud, just because there's a lot of vendors out there that are giving people a really bad first taste of a cloud contact center solution. You know, I think in the latest DMG report, they reported that there's about 180 vendors providing a cloud contact center solution, and you know, there's only about 10 of us that actually have a real product that works, you know, 99.99% of the time or better, and actually does what it's advertised to do. So, you know, there's a lot of garbage out there, and I think, you know, it just takes a lot of time and money to figure out which vendors you're going to use and which are even the right vendors to be talking to.
So let's expound on that, Jeff, if we could. So we know of the benefits that you and Krista have so eloquently outlined, but because you're one of those reputable companies, what do you think are the remaining challenges with the cloud?
I think there's a lot. Continued compliance issues, and Reed could talk about this a little bit. You know, the PCI is becoming more complex, and as you're operating in a cloud environment, it becomes harder and harder for vendors like Connect First to architect solutions that are scalable and fault-tolerant, user-friendly, and also compliant in a multi-tenant environment. It's not an easy thing to accomplish, and I think you know, there's some other challenges that could potentially come down from a government standpoint that could put some pressure on cloud vendors. Net neutrality is one of them. If net neutrality goes away and vendors like Comcast or Time Warner are able to charge exorbitant fees for public internet access, that could be another major hurdle. So I think it's still a pretty young sector, and we're going to be faced with some pretty big challenges for the next 5-6 years.
Okay, so you're setting me up great, Jeff. You keep throwing the ball over to me. So since you brought up like the data security part and the PCI and all those challenges, what are those companies like yourself and others doing in order to create secure data? And are there any recent innovations that you see?
So there's not I wouldn't say there's a lot of innovation, but there's a lot of adoption of current security technologies into the cloud sector. We're seeing a lot of the telecom carriers start to support secure RTP, which is secure voice data. You know, it's funny because historically the public telephone network has been exempted from PCI. You know, you can have an unencrypted call over the PSTN, and it was outside the scope of PCI. With VoIP and SIP, that's not the case. So we're seeing a lot of the big telecoms, you know, the AT&Ts, the Verizons, start to build infrastructure which allows vendors like Connect First to communicate securely. The cost of inter-carrier connects has gone down substantially. You know, and there's a lot more out there in terms of best practices for security. You know, but some of the biggest names in the world in terms of corporations have had data breaches, and from each of those events, there's a learning that goes on, and that learning is made publicly available to people like Connect First, to organizations like Connect First, and then we could adopt best practices that'll help prevent our customers' data from being exposed, like, say, Target or Home Depot this year.
That's fantastic. Thank you. When you talk about, I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit here. What do you think is the new technology regarding IVR that's out in the marketplace now?
So ultimately, the technology regarding IVR hasn't changed a lot. I think the mechanisms to bring IVR to market are kind of where the innovations are being made. IVR still is a really big component in any operation that handles inbound or outbound calls. So we're seeing a trend in the industry where people are trying to make it easier for customers and companies to deploy IVRs to offload some of what the consumer will accept into an IVR and handle the rest with a live agent to drive down some of their costs. So most of the innovation is around building easier IVR infrastructure, and also tying that back to speech analytics systems, speech recognition systems, and having the ability for the IVR to dip into your data source, whether it's Salesforce or Sugar or a proprietary system.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Krista, I want to swing over to you and just talk a little bit about something that you said previously that caught my attention. You talked about that the BPO space needs to be much more than just inbound, outbound, and some emails, that they have to really integrating with chat, social media, those things. So what channel do you think will see the most growth next year? And can you just expand a little, and why, again, it's so important for all the BPOs to have that capability to deal with all those different channels?
Yeah, so we're really good at coining new phrases, in my opinion, that sometimes mean things we've already been talking about forever. So the customer experience, which is really, to me, at the heart of it, still good customer service, really requires today that organizations through technology allow consumers and clients and prospects to communicate with the organization in whatever way is most convenient to them. And so we know that, and we've been talking about this idea of multi-channel support and communication now for a few years. But I think that when you look at what was a trend coming into this year, is still something that most of us have not fully adapted within our contact centers. So I think staying focused on some of the basic communication channels of chat, social media response management, and that can come in a number of different forms. But I like the way that fits into the contact center and the services that we provide. And then also mobile app integration, which I'm not basing this on any specific research, but I'm guessing is probably going to be the area we're going to see the most growth in. Obviously, the statistics around people that are using mobile applications and cell phones versus landlines today, and we have a whole generation or two now, much younger than I, that really do everything on their cell phones. And so I think having the technology in place that allows a consumer very easily from their cell phone right into the contact center to transfer voice and data for seamless interaction is going to be a really big deal for organizations to be looking at. The consumer is driving the market today, and I don't think we can come to the table as a partner or vendor if we're not offering all of those services to our clients and really help them define and create the best customer experience if we're not supporting all those channels today. And there are obviously cost benefits as well to that for our clients when you consider chat and some of those things too.
So that leads me right into my next question. So Krista, I know that you support through whether you've done consulting or the companies that you've worked with and that type of thing, because we've been moving into this new world, so to speak, with customer experience, customer engagement, what do you think the struggles with executive teams in the BPO space are concerned about today?
Oh, My executives are concerned about a lot today. I mean, I think that there's still a truth that, for those of us that, again, are smaller and private, P&L and profitability is a struggle in this space, and so how do you reinvest in that the right way, and how do you create the right priorities so that, going back to the whole discussion around cloud, that you're not investing what limited resources and money you have into a failed attempt to get you somewhere. And so I think that when I look at what my executive clients are concerned about, they're always concerned about profitability and growth. And growth requires a competitive advantage. And competitive advantage in this space always means technology, right? Because we're just a technology-driven space. So being able to navigate and create the right strategy and timeline for successful deployment of some of these things are definitely on the top of my clients' lists.
That I couldn't agree more. So Jeff, I want, if you could expound a little bit on what Krista is saying, because of the fact that how does somebody go about when they're looking at all the new technology and make sure that they're not being taken for a ride and spending all this time and energy on something that might not work for them?
So, I think there's a number of good sources. There's folks like Krista out there that know the landscape and can help guide their customers to make good decisions the first time around. The most costly thing you can do when implementing new technology is implement the wrong technology first and have to do it over again with the right. We really like DMG Consulting. They do a nice job of kind of laying out all the information that you would need to make a good and sound decision when buying technology. But I want to actually ask Krista a question. When you're looking at your customers' P&L, what percentage of their monthly or annual expenditures are on the technology side? You're much closer to that than I am. Where does the technology fit in that P&L?
I'm gonna say, boy, that's putting me on the spot, Jeff. I'm gonna say probably roughly around 15%. Obviously labor is our most expensive component, and technology all helps us manage that better. But I would say probably around 15% on average. But I would also argue that many of those budgets are underfunding technology, and they're probably running leaner than they should be on human resource capital and resources in-house, and on the type of technology that they should be providing to run their business.
So the reason I ask is because that number is continuing to come down. The technology is becoming cheaper to implement and manage. With a premise-based system, that number is probably closer to 25 or 30% for, let's say, a 200-seat center, maybe running on Avaya or Cisco gear. It's interesting that the risk in choosing bad technology is higher, but the reward in making that move from premise to cloud is much greater.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't mean to hijack you, Chris.
Yeah.
No, I'm so glad you did. That's fantastic. You're a great moderator, Jeff. I love it. So, Chris, I'm going to go into a different sort of question, but it's still tying into all this because a lot of companies are going through their budgeting process right now. So what do you think, or what advice can you offer to people that they need to include in the last little bit of this year, and I know we don't have much left, and Q1 for their best practices?
Well, I would start, Christine, with do a budgeting process and do strategic planning. I think it overwhelms me how often we come into organizations where there is just talent amongst the team. And we are an industry that we are bred to be reactionary to our clients' needs and to move quickly and fast and to make stuff happen now. And that is part of how we service our clients, and that should never go away. But I would present that if you're running your business strategy strategy that way, there's a better approach. So I think even doing a budget and having a set Q4 budgeting process where you're getting key input from key executives or department heads about what their vision of their department is next year, and then having strategy meetings around all of this. I think sometimes we just try to one-off and assign to one person, go research and tell us what to do in this whole big area of technology enhancement and multi-channel rollout, and that should be a team discussion, and there should be a strategy meeting and planning and a timeline and a budget around that. I think that the outcome when you do things the right way is obviously going to, be more likely successful than if we're just kind of rushing into stuff. And I think if we're waiting for a client to demand something and then we're reacting to that and trying to deploy something new, whether it's technology or process, that makes me nervous. I understand why it needs to happen. I've been doing this a long time, but just have the budget process, have the strategy meetings, get off site with your key people, bring in a third party for another opinion. I'm clearly a little biased about that, but I think we can get groupthink within an organization. So go through the process of planning for the year. That right there would be a step for most organizations.
I agree totally. So I want to talk, I'm going to go back to something, Krista, because it just hit me. But you are exactly right. We use these buzz phrases all the time, or these keywords. And one of them, especially in 2014, has been on the customer experience. So and I don't know necessarily if we've achieved it as an industry overall, but when you look at your bigger companies and that corporate focus, what has the impact of that been on the BPO space regarding customer experience?
I think it's the things we kind of keep circling around. I think it's the multi-channel. It's providing communication options to the consumer, the prospect, the clients, the way they want to communicate. I think it's forcing us as an industry to look more aggressively at how we're going to handle technology strategy around integrating chat and mobile applications and social media, the stuff that keeps kind of coming up. Because to me, customer experience is really this concept of good customer support on steroids, right? So we know good customer support. We know good inbound customer support basics and what that needs to be. But now we need to open that up to the way the consumer wants to communicate with us. And I think it also means in our space, which is something that I think we're struggling with a little more freedom. So we're generally a very structured industry, right? We have a lot of individuals in our operations that are managing sometimes multiple clients' needs and touch points, and so we try to be pretty scripted and confined in what we allow them to do. But part of customer experience invites us to look at some other big logos and companies that really are creating and empowering their frontline customer service agents to find more creative and unique resolution, if you will. And I think that that's a little bit of a change for us, I think, in how we train and manage, but supports, again, that more personalized experience for the consumer, which is really what the market demands today.
I think you hit the nail on the head. And Jeff, I should have asked you this question as well, but going back into the executive, the executive process from 2014 into 2015, are there any best practices that you think companies need to be really aware of, especially surrounding technology going into 2015 and planning for?
It's tough because each organization is at a different point in their life cycle with technology. Typically when you adopt a technology, you need to keep it around for at least 3 years before you can see any ROI on it. So depending on where companies are, if you're 12 months out from needing to look for new technology, you should definitely be building into your strategic initiatives early in the year understanding the market, understanding who the real players are, and budgeting that out even for 2016. You know, if you're at the end of Q4 and you need to make a technology decision for Q1, you've probably already messed up 3 or 4 quarters ago. So I think, you know, from a best practices standpoint, with technology, you always want to be looking at least 12 months down the road, because it's always a little more expensive and a little more time consuming to implement and adopt new technologies than you would hope it to be.
That's great.
Christine,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, go
Could
ahead,
I
Krista.
just add one other thing about all of this? You know, I know we want to believe that we can just go through this technology review process, find the right product, install it, and bam, we're up and running and life is good. But I just want to somewhere in this conversation insert to that, you know, when you're evaluating the technologies, it's not only about price and features, and user adaptability and ease for the users to use it. But I also encourage my clients and anyone on the webinar today to also really look at the organization that you're going to be working with. You know, I think sometimes, you know, we all have our own unique processes, and even though there are best practices, every client I work with does things a little different, and they look at things a little different, and their clients' needs are a little different. So to assume that you're going to just go plug and play any new technology out of the box and then be disappointed like within 2 weeks that it's not doing everything you wanted it to do is kind of heading into that a little naive. And so I just want to somewhere in here insert this idea of making sure that you are picking not only a product but a company and a team you can work with. I think, you know, that's one of the reasons we've had a lot of clients that have had success with Jeff and his team, because it's not just about saying, okay, we like what you have, you know, get us on it and buy. It's about, we like what you have, get us installed, and then let's really make sure it's working for our culture, our processes, our internal and external needs. And so that relationship and that support is as important today, I think, when you're doing that evaluation as the technology itself. So
I think that's a great point. That's a very good point, Krista. I'm glad you barged in. That was awesome. Reed, we haven't heard a lot from you, so I'm going to come to you now, because obviously compliance in our world is huge. So let me start off by asking you this question, Reed. What do you think are some new regulatory compliance matters that might be on the horizon, or what are some of the emerging issues that you're seeing?
Yeah, well, I can look to my crystal ball and you know, get some ideas of, you know, what we should expect in the next year. I really think there could be an increase in enforcement regarding call time restrictions. I think we can also see an increase in caller ID requirements. There are several states that right now that have pending bills that are being reviewed. I think we can also see some more restrictions on calls and texts to wireless devices or cell phones. Right now, there's a few states that have pending bills on them. I expect to see probably more bills submitted in 2015. And I think probably one of the biggest issues we're going to face next year, and we've been facing it this year too, and beyond, is privacy. And we kind of touched on these issues a little bit earlier when we were talking about the cloud. You know, Jeff mentioned that earlier. But I really think that privacy, security issues are going to be paramount in the upcoming years, especially when we've been talking as we move into new technology. We cannot forget that when we bring new technology in, we have to make sure that we're crossing the T's and dotting the I's when it comes to what's required from the regulator perspective. So I would expect to see some additional changes in privacy laws, you know, consumer choice, data breach issues, even call recording issues coming up in the next year.
Thank you. That leads me into another question for you, Reed, is because you did talk about, because it is in what Jeff and Krista have alluded to with the technology and those types of things. And I know not every company is as completely focused on compliance and making sure they are meeting all the requirements like you are at Sitel. So when when people are using their new technology, what should the executives in those types of companies be looking for to making sure that their company is compliant with all the regulations?
Right. Well, there's a couple thoughts there. To be real honest, in a lot of companies, compliance isn't the number one issue that they're dealing with. To be quite honest, they're focusing on bringing money into the company, which I fully understand. But when you bring that money into the company, you have to protect that money. And as we all know, that fines can be quite devastating to the bottom line, because fines don't go through any, there's no write-offs. They go right to the bottom line, so they have a huge impact on the bottom line. So compliance has to be part of the decision-making process, and included in the budgetary considerations. A lot of times compliance is seen as a cost center, and to some extent it is. But if the view is that it's a cost center and not a revenue saving center or loss prevention center, something along those lines, then we kind of lose focus on what its real purpose is. And so I really think that as we move into the new year, that's what part of the decision making has to be included is compliance, and part of that needs to be risk assessments, identifying the big risks. And if they don't have the money to do that, then bring in third parties to help. Bring in. There's a lot of attorneys. There's a lot of firms out there that do provide those kind of services that can help guide them through that maze of regulatory issues.
Great advice. So I know you talked some on the state side of it with the new bills being administered or brought in, those types of things. But did you see any changes in 2015 to the FTC's telemarketing sales rule or the FCC's TCPA at all?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's possible. Right now, there are 38 states that have sent a notice or memorandum to the FCC and FTC asking them to change parts of their rules. And it's not that they have anything against the current rules, they just want to see more of an emphasis on these. And some of the areas that they're requesting an emphasis on or increase legislation or rules around, rather, is an increase in number of fraud complaints from customers who have been contacted by telephone. So the AGs want the FTC to require sellers and telemarketers to create and maintain call records in order to help attorneys generals with enforcement action. How convenient. They also have general media solutions, advertising result in growing inbound telemarketing, so they want to see controls around that. The use of certain payment methods that allow the retrieval of funds with little meaningful scrutiny from the recipients. And what they're talking about here is like wire transfers, remotely created checks, payment orders, etc. And the last topic they mentioned was pre-acquired account information. The Attorney General said that they want the FCC to prohibit telemarketers from using pre-acquired account information to charge customers' account without getting more details and information about that account from the consumer at the time of the call. A couple other things. On November 19th of this year, the FTC released its annual Do Not Call Registry Data Book. And this provide a lot of statistics about the National Do Not Call Registry that we can kind of glean some things out that maybe they might be focusing on in the future. And one of the things that stuck out to me in my mind when I read through it anyway was robocalls. And they also held, which I thought was interesting, in August of this year, they had a conference, the DEF CON 22 conference, and they held another public contest for they entitled Zapping Rachel, which is another one of those robocall campaigns, looking for input from individuals on coming up with ideas to how to defeat robocalls. So I really think that we could see some changes there. If not changes in the rules, then it probably increased in the increase in the enforcement actions there. You mentioned the FCC. I think, again, we could see some issues from cell phone regulations, perhaps if not from the rule perspective, then from the enforcement action regarding wireless devices. So those are some of my thoughts.
That's very excellent, Reed. All I can say about that. So I know we've seen an increase in 2014 because of the legislation that went into effect the previous year in October. We saw an increase in class action lawsuits. Reed, do you think that's going to continue in 2015?
I really do. I think that the TCPA actions cases have been escalating at an alarming pace, and I don't anticipate those slowing down as long as there's attorneys out there willing to file suit, try to get classes put together. I don't anticipate those slowing down at all. In fact, earlier this year, this fall actually, we had the PACE Washington D.C. Summit. And there was an attorney there who actually files these class action lawsuits. And I really, based on what he said and what I've seen in the marketplace, I don't see a slowdown of these, and I really anticipate an escalation, if nothing else, from on those types of suits.
I remember that session well, and it was interesting hearing him talk. And if he's any indication, it's not going to slow down. I absolutely agree with you. So, Reed, let me take a little different turn here. What is the development of case law on vicarious liability? Do you have any update on that?
Yeah, there's. Well, let me start out just so we're on the same page. Vicarious liability means that it generally means that companies that hire third parties can be held liable for the actions of those third parties. I'm not an attorney, so I'm not giving you, I'm not trying to give law or legal advice here at all. But I'm just, but the TCPA prohibits calls to wireless devices using automated dialing telephone systems without prior express consent or without prior express written consent of the called person. Text messages are considered to be auto-dialed calls under the TCPA. So it's important for sellers and telemarketers because damages start around $500 and can actually escalate up to $1,500 per text. So in the end, damages can be quite large. There have been several issues and arguments regarding liability when it comes to when a company hires another company to make calls or send text messages on their behalf. In fact, there was a case that just settled in September. This is Gomez versus Campbell. And without going into the details of the case, the big takeaway from this case was that not only is the telemarketing company that actually made the calls or sent the text message responsible, but also the company that hires the call center can be liable as well. We may see additional decisions and cases in the upcoming year. Just this year alone, and this is what I was able to find anyway, there have been several cases and rulings that have come down. I mentioned Gomez versus Campbell. That came out of the 9th District on September of this year. There was also Palm Beach Golf Center, Boca Inc. versus Saris, which is 11th Circuit Court. Thomas versus Taco Bell, again, the 9th Circuit, and that happened in July. And then Clark versus Avatar Tex, which is the Southern District of Texas, and that one settled in January 8th. And these are all dealing with vicarious liability. So this, in my estimation, I don't think that we'll see a slowdown, but there has been some substantial issues come up this year. One last point is that the FCC also published a declaratory ruling in earlier was actually in 2013, which they covered this issue. So there's a lot of data out there. Again, I don't think that this is going away, and I think it's being being emphasized in the courts.
Thank you for that update. The next question I have for you, Reed, I know you touched on a little bit, but this kind of goes back to everything relating to the TCPA legislation. how have vendors worked at complying with the TCPA legislation that we've been dealing with for over a year now?
Right. Well, good vendors have already developed and implemented comprehensive compliance programs that could include, in part, developing and implementing policies and procedures, implementing monitoring and reporting processes, conducting risk assessments, training employees, among other things. So there's a lot of stuff that they should already be put in place. And just some thoughts: if you hire a third party, it's important to understand that they have already put these compliance measures in place. And a good idea is to ask them, make them prove what they're doing. We work with our clients on a regular basis, provide them white papers of our compliance efforts. We go through presentations with them, and then verify that during audits. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do on the front end to make sure that the vendor you've hired has your best interest and the consumer's best interest at heart. Because for no other reason, for what we talked about just a few minutes ago, vicarious liability, you're going to be held accountable for what those vendors do on your behalf, based on what we've seen, in the courts and in the declaratory ruling from the FCC. So it's important to take a look at those and make sure that those compliance efforts are in place, and you verify that before you hire that person or that company.
Great advice. I'm going to throw out the last question to all of you, because I think this is important to talk about each of your areas of expertise. What are your tips for setting priorities within an organization for 2015 under each of your respective areas? Krista, it looks like you're thinking, so I want to come to you first.
I was thinking. I was thinking I don't want to be repetitive, actually, but again, it's year end. Let year end be reflective. Let year end be a time of honest internal assessment about where your organization is at, and where you want your organization to go, and the honesty of what is going to be required to get you there. And there's a term that I find myself saying more and more in 2014, and that is that leadership matters. And oftentimes we've spent a lot of 2014 going into organizations, doing operational assessments, and helping organizations determine what are our strengths, what are we doing well, where are we efficient, where are we, do we have competitive advantage in our processes, in our people, in our technology, and then where are the gaps, where are the opportunities, and hopefully not, but where are the red flags even that we need to get on top of. And I think whether you have somebody externally help you do that or you do that internally, like, be reflective and then be honest and then have a plan. And I think to all of my executive friends and clients, remember that we matter in all of this. So if your organization and your team is struggling in an area, oftentimes our operational assessments lead us right back up to the top, right? And what we are saying is the priority and what we're really telling people to do don't match, or our communication, just leadership matters. So have a cohesive, good, communication-driven executive team and management team, and then I think you can make whatever you need to do happen for 2015.
I think that's very important. If we don't look back, we can't go forward appropriately. Mm-hmm. That's a great statement. Jeff, what about you in your areas?
So from a technology standpoint, I would say that for 2015, people need to start looking at technology from a much more holistic approach. It's pretty often that we find the management team is ultimately not vetting the technology. They're sending out, a technology specialist, either third party or an individual inside the organization, to look at the technology, and they pick it kind of inside a very narrow scope. Whether that be 2 key features or price, but I think people need to start looking at their technology in general from a much higher level, and look at how it's going to support the compliance, how it's going to actually impact the P&L, how it's going to impact employee morale. You know, is it good software? Is it going to make the employees and the contact center agents' jobs easier? So, you know, I think it's a trend that we're starting to see. But historically, I think the decision-making process for technology has been very narrow-scoped. So I'd like to see that improve over the next couple of years.
That's excellent. Reed, what about you?
Yeah, well, I think that, as I said earlier, I think risk assessments need to be a priority. I think it's important to, you know, when you start out in the old year, begin the new year, figure out where you're at from a risk perspective, and then develop and build your plans for the next year going forward based on those assessments. You know, take a look at what we've put in place and determine, is it working? Is it meeting our needs? Is it, you know, achieving the goals that we want? And if it's not, then have that honest look. I think, like Krista mentioned, is, you know, have that honest look. If it's not working, let's change it and make it work to make sure we get our the goals we need from it. And you know, to build on what both Krista and Jeffrey both said, tone at the top. It's really important from a compliance perspective. If you don't have that support at the higher levels of the organization, the compliance efforts really suffer because of it.
Great advice from all three of you. Thank you. We have a couple minutes left, so Shelby, I don't know if we got any questions that came into the marketing@connectfirst.com that you want to pose to the group.
We did get a couple of questions, but I think they're a little bit more complex. So I'm just going to send them all to the respective people. If you are one of the attendees that did send in a question, we will reach out to you via email.
Fantastic. Thank you, Shelby. Well, that concludes our Google Hangout for today. Again, I would like to thank our esteemed panel of Krista Heibel, Jeff Mina, and Reed Hauser. You've provided some great insights for the remainder of 2014 in your respective areas and how we can move forward in 2015. As a reminder, everyone, the webinar was being recorded, so you will receive the recording by email at the end of the week. So I thank everybody so much for attending. I wish you a great, happy, and healthy holiday season and a wonderful new year. Take care, everyone.